We actually know now what has been going on in these camps.
The Holocaust didn't end because people found out about it. It ended when the war ended. 90% of the pre-war Jewish population in Poland was exterminated. That's around 3 million people. To do something of that scale, the Nazi system had to be massive, and it had to be secretive. The Allies did acknowledge that Jews were being systematically prosecuted, but this only happened in December of 1942. That was barely 3 years before the war ended. By then, most of the deaths had already happened. So the question is, how did Allies finally come to understand the scale of what was happening? It came down to one man. His name was Jan Karski. He's one of the most courageous and forgotten messengers of World War II. He was a Polish courier who walked into hell twice. And he wrote it all down. Take a look at this page from his book published in 1944. You mean that every one of those who were presumably deported was actually killed? Every single one, the Bund leader asserted. He carried these records to London and to Washington. The story is full of moments where people changed their minds. But it's also full of moments where the world looked away while the tragedy was right in front of them. Jan Karski was a courier for the Polish resistance during World War II. His job was simple yet incredibly dangerous. Carry information out of Nazi-occupied Poland and deliver it to the Allies.
We have no means of actively opposing the German murders. We cannot overcome them or save anybody, but we protest from the bottom of our hearts, which are filled with compassion.
In 1942, Karski did something that was almost impossible. He secretly entered the Warsaw Ghetto. Then he was taken into a transit camp where the Jews were being sent to their deaths. What he saw wasn't rumor, it wasn't speculation, it was first-hand. Karski wrote it all down in detailed reports and later in a book published in 1944. Then he traveled, illegally under false names, from Warsaw to London to Washington. His goal was clear. Tell the people in power exactly what was happening before it was too late. This is where the story gets uncomfortable. There's a reason witnesses said, once you've been to Warsaw Ghetto, you'll never stop wanting to scream. But in 1942, when Karski was smuggled inside, he walked those streets filled with death. The goal was simple, to see what Nazis were doing to the Jewish people. Karski walked those streets at all hours. He saw children starving on the corners, families too poor to bury their dead, bodies lay in the open. And what later records confirm that this wasn't just chaos, it was systemic starvation, death in daylight. What you see here isn't exaggeration. Izbica was a transit ghetto where Jews from Poland, Germany and Austria were held, right before being transported to Belzec and Sobibor, where they were gassed. We have transport records. Thousands of people loaded onto trains from Izbica. In September of 1942, Karski disguised himself as an Estonian guard and entered Izbica. He walked families crammed into cattle carts. By this point, Karski had gathered evidence that 1.9 million Polish Jews were being murdered, and he tried to smuggle that evidence to the Allied nations. At a time when being caught smuggling a single loaf of bread meant being shot. Still, Karski crossed occupied Europe and reached London, carrying those reports, hoping someone would listen. All of this happened in secret without the approval of the Polish government in exile. As the genocide accelerated, Karski met Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden. He asked for a meeting with Prime Minister Churchill, which was obviously denied. Some historians argue that the Foreign Office showed little interest in this. There was just polite nods and more delays. But this is where the story takes a turn. The next year, Karski was sent to Washington. This time, he met the president. On July 28, 1943, Karski met Franklin D. Roosevelt. The meeting lasted for an hour. Roosevelt asked questions, Karski answered. The ghetto, the trains, the camps, everything that he knew. He also met Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter. After 20 minutes, Frankfurter stood up and said, "I'm unable to believe you." When pressed, he added, "I did not say that he is lying. I am unable to believe what he just told me." And this is one of those great tragedies of the modern era. Two fronts, millions dying, leaders making impossible choices. Defenders say that military victory had to come first. Others say something else. A bureaucracy that was given the full evidence of this prosecution, which it simply filed away. After this, Karski went public. In 1944, while the war was still raging, he published the book Story of a Secret State. Not after the victory, but while the camps were still operating. The book sold wildly in the United States. Newspapers reviewed it, lecture halls filled. At the same time, reports like Karski's stacked up from diplomats, resistance workers, and refugees. By then, the information was no longer isolative. It was everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And if you put the dates side by side, 1942 when Karski enters the ghetto and the transit camp, 1942-1943 he briefs the Allied leaders, December of 1942 when the Allies publicly confirmed the extermination, 1944 the rescue agency is formed, and 1945 when the camps are liberated. The information although moved quickly, the decisions didn't. Karski crossed Europe in months, but government took years to process that information. That gap between the evidence and the action is the story.